The scent of stale dust and aged wood clung to the air in the old Victorian house on Elmwood Lane, a pervasive aroma that Arthur Vance had long ceased to notice, or perhaps had simply chosen to ignore. To him, it was the smell of Eleanor's collection, a euphemism he used for the sprawling, chaotic accumulation of objects that filled every nook and cranny of their home in the quiet, unassuming suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. Every morning, as he navigated the narrow, winding paths carved through stacks of forgotten furniture, boxes of tarnished silverware, and towering piles of yellowed books, he felt a fresh wave of irritation. Eleanor, his wife of nearly 3 decades, seemed oblivious to the encroaching clutter. At 50, she moved through the labyrinthine rooms with an almost ethereal grace, her spectacles perpetually perched on the end of her nose, her soft, graying hair often escaping its loose bun. Her clothes were usually comfortable, a little worn, hinting at an indifference to appearances that baffled Arthur. He was a software engineer, precise and logical, whose world revolved around clean code and efficient systems. Eleanor's world, on the other hand, was a sprawling, analog universe of forgotten relics. Honestly, Eleanor. Arthur grumbled one Tuesday evening, his voice a low, exasperated rumble that had become a familiar backdrop to their dinners. He pushed a stack of antique lace doilies aside to make room for his plate on the small, overcrowded dining table. Can't we just get rid of some of this stuff? The garage is practically impassable. I nearly tripped over that ancient spinning wheel this morning. We could use the space, and frankly, we could use the money. Eleanor, meticulously cutting a green bean on her plate, didn't immediately respond. Her eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, were focused on the task, as if the green bean held the secrets of the universe. She was a woman of quiet gestures, her internal world a rich tapestry rarely glimpsed by outsiders, especially not by her pragmatic husband. To Arthur, Eleanor's junk collection was a monumental financial drain, a monument to her impracticality. He saw a pile of rusty tools. She saw a blacksmith's legacy. He saw chipped porcelain. She saw a forgotten artisan's touch. Their house, once a symbol of their shared life, had become a battleground of conflicting values. The truth was, their financial situation was tight. Arthur's company, a mid-sized tech firm, had been struggling, and rumors of layoffs hung heavy in the air, fueling his anxieties and sharpening his complaints. He'd tried to talk to Eleanor about their budget, about tightening their belts, but she would just nod vaguely, her mind seemingly miles away, perhaps lost in the intricate patterns of a moth-eaten tapestry she'd unearthed at a yard sale. He often felt like he was living with a stranger, a gentle, absent-minded woman whose only passion was hoarding what he considered worthless debris. "Arthur, they're not stuff," Eleanor finally said, her voice soft, almost a murmur. "They're pieces of history. Each one has a story." She gestured vaguely around the cluttered room, her hand sweeping over a collection of tarnished silver frames, a stack of vintage travel trunks, and a faded globe with antiquated political borders. "A story that deserves to be remembered." Arthur merely sighed, spearing a piece of chicken. "Well, those stories aren't paying the bills, are they? We're living paycheck to paycheck. Eleanor, this isn't a museum. It's our home. And it's a mess." He didn't understand. He couldn't grasp the deep, almost spiritual connection Eleanor had with these objects. To him, they were just things, occupying space, accumulating dust, and bleeding their meager savings. Eleanor's quietness was often mistaken for indifference or even ignorance, but beneath her placid exterior lay a mind as sharp and intricate as the delicate filigree on one of her antique brooches. She absorbed every detail, every nuance, storing it away in a vast mental archive. Few knew, and Arthur certainly didn't, that Eleanor Vance had once been Eleanor Dubois, a prodigious young art history scholar whose insights into overlooked periods of decorative arts had bordered on revolutionary. She had published a groundbreaking paper on regional American folk art before her early 20s, predicted trends in the antique market years before they materialized, and possessed an uncanny knack for identifying hidden gems amidst piles of apparent rubbish. But that life, that ambition, had been abruptly curtailed. Lost in a whirlwind of academic politics and a profound sense of disillusionment she rarely, if ever, spoke of. There was a faded daguerreotype on her bedside table, a picture of her great-aunt Clara, a renowned but eccentric art dealer who had always encouraged Eleanor's unusual eye. Sometimes, when Arthur was out, Eleanor would pull out an old, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with cryptic notes and meticulous sketches of obscure maker's marks, forgotten techniques, and a strange, almost coded shorthand. These were not just records of purchases. They were records of research, of a passion that ran deeper than mere collecting, a quiet defiance of a world that had once tried to dismiss her. One particularly blustery autumn evening, the wind howling around the old Victorian, Arthur was in the garage, muttering to himself as he attempted to clear a path to his workbench. He swore loudly as his foot snagged on a pile of old newspapers. "This is ridiculous. We can't live like this." Just then, a faint, desperate mewling reached his ears from outside. Arthur paused, his irritation momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. The sound was thin, vulnerable. He peered through the dusty garage window. A small, scrawny tabby cat, no more than a kitten, was huddled under the overgrown hydrangea bush, shivering, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. It looked terrified, lost, and clearly injured. "Stray," Arthur mumbled, turning back to his task. "Probably got hit by something. Nature takes its course." He tried to dismiss it, to focus on the impossible task of organizing the garage. He had no time for stray animals, but Eleanor, drawn by the sound of Arthur's outburst, had come to the garage door. She saw the kitten immediately, her eyes, usually obscured by her glasses, softened with an immediate, profound compassion. Without a word, she stepped outside into the biting wind, her movements gentle, deliberate. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured, kneeling slowly. The kitten, startled, hissed weakly, trying to retreat deeper into the bush. Eleanor didn't force it. She moved with infinite patience, extending a hand slowly, talking to it in a low, soothing voice. She didn't have a cat carrier, or even a box. But her eyes scanned the cluttered garage. Her gaze landed on an old, discarded wooden crate, its slats broken. Beside it, a forgotten quilt, faded but soft. Arthur watched, perplexed. What was she doing? She wasn't thinking about bringing that creature inside. Was she? Eleanor, with a quiet determination, gently coaxed the kitten out. Its leg was clearly broken. She carefully cradled the tiny animal. Then, instead of bringing it directly inside, she went to her junk pile. She took the broken wooden crate, carefully removed the sharp edges, then lined it with layers of the soft quilt, making a small, warm, surprisingly comfortable bed. She found a chipped saucer, filled it with water, and retrieved a small can of tuna from the kitchen, mashing it for the tiny creature. She didn't make a fuss. She didn't ask Arthur for help. She simply and efficiently attended to the helpless animal, her movements imbued with a quiet dignity. She carefully placed the kitten in its makeshift bed, stroking its head with a tenderness that surprised Arthur. The kitten, miraculously, purred, a tiny, vibrating sound of gratitude. Arthur, standing in the garage, watched the scene unfold. His wife, whom he often dismissed as impractical and wasteful, was demonstrating a quiet competence, a profound empathy, and an unexpected resourcefulness. She had used what he considered junk to provide comfort and shelter for a vulnerable creature, seeing value where he saw only clutter. This small, almost unnoticed act of compassion, performed without fanfare, was Eleanor's save the cat moment. It underscored the quiet strength, the deep well of kindness, and the inherent wisdom that lay beneath her unassuming exterior, a wisdom that extended beyond art and history to the very core of life itself. It was a glimpse of the Eleanor he had married, the woman whose quiet dignity he had long overlooked, buried beneath layers of frustration and financial worry. The chaos of her collection, he realized, was not just about accumulation. It was about seeing potential, about nurturing the overlooked and giving forgotten things a second chance. The quiet hum of domestic tension in the Vance household had escalated into a persistent thrum, a discordant note in the otherwise peaceful suburban symphony. Arthur's company, Bite and Bloom Software, had finally announced its long-feared restructuring. While he hadn't been laid off outright, his department was being significantly downsized, and his own position felt precariously balanced on the edge of a corporate precipice. The financial strain, once a distant worry, now pressed down on him with crushing weight, turning his usual grumbling into outright demanding. "Eleanor, this is not a drill," Arthur stated one frigid Saturday morning, his breath puffing visible in the unheated garage. He stood amidst the dizzying stacks of Eleanor's collection, a worn-out ledger clutched in his hand. The air in the garage was thick with the scent of old paper, aged metal, and a faint, sweet decay from forgotten textiles. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the chaotic beams. "My bonus is gone. My stock options are worthless. We need liquid assets, and we need them now. This house, this hoard," he gestured wildly, his frustration boiling over, "is choking us." His voice, usually measured, was laced with an edge of desperation Eleanor rarely heard. It pricked at her, a sharp, unwelcome intrusion into her carefully cultivated serenity. She watched him, her quiet eyes observing the frantic energy that pulsed around him. He paced, kicking gently at a pile of antique ceramic plates nestled in a cardboard box. "We can't keep living like this," Arthur continued, oblivious to the faint tremor in Eleanor's hands. "The property taxes are climbing. The house needs a new roof. And my job isn't stable. We need to declutter. Massively. We need to clear out this garage, the attic, the basement. We need to make this place presentable so we can sell it." The last two words hung in the cold air like icicles, sharp and chilling. Eleanor flinched. Sell the house. This old Victorian, with its creaky floors and drafty windows, was more than just bricks and mortar to her. It was a repository of forgotten stories, a canvas for her quiet passion. Every object within its walls, no matter how humble, represented a fragment of history, a life lived, a purpose fulfilled. It was her sanctuary, her private museum of the overlooked. The thought of dismantling it, of casting off the pieces of history she had so carefully rescued, filled her with a profound sense of violation. "Sell it," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Arthur, no. This is our home. Our home is buried under a mountain of junk," he retorted, his voice rising. "This isn't a museum, Eleanor. It's a fire hazard. It's a financial black hole. And you?" He pointed an accusing finger at a stack of antique hat boxes. "You just keep bringing more in." He stopped pacing, facing her directly. "I've been looking at smaller places, cheaper places, but we can't even show this house in its current state. So, here's what's going to happen. We're going to have a massive garage sale. Everything that isn't nailed down, everything we haven't touched in a year, is going. And if that's not enough, I'm hiring a professional decluttering service. They come in, they clear it out, they haul it away. We need to free up capital. Eleanor, this isn't a request. It's a necessity." Eleanor felt a cold dread creep into her stomach. A garage sale. A professional decluttering service. His words conjured images of her carefully curated world being ripped apart, indiscriminately tossed aside by strangers who saw only trash. He had always dismissed her collection, but this was different. This was an ultimatum. He was blaming her passion, for their financial woes. He couldn't see the intrinsic worth of these objects, the potential that lay hidden beneath layers of dust and neglect. He just saw clutter, a drain on their resources. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of desperation and fear. She knew the true value of some of these items, a value she had meticulously documented in her secret journal, not just monetary, but historical, artistic. She had acquired them not with reckless spending, but with a shrewd eye and an uncanny ability to spot a diamond in the rough. She had never spent more than she could afford, often paying mere dollars for items that, to her trained eye, held immense potential. The thought of them being sold for pennies at a yard sale, or worse, thrown into a landfill, made her heart ache. "Arthur, please," she pleaded, her voice tinged with a raw vulnerability she rarely showed. "Some of these things, they're important to me." "Important?" he scoffed, gesturing to a collection of chipped porcelain dolls with vacant eyes. "They're important, Clutter. We're talking about our future here. Eleanor. Our solvency. You need to face reality. This isn't a hobby anymore. It's a problem." His frustration had twisted into a bitter resentment, a belief that her eccentricities were actively undermining their financial stability. Eleanor's internal conflict raged. Her natural inclination was to retreat, to avoid confrontation, to minimize her own desires in the face of Arthur's overwhelming pragmatism. Her past had taught her the painful lesson of being dismissed, of her knowledge being devalued. But the idea of losing these objects, of surrendering her passion to Arthur's exasperated demands, awakened a dormant protectiveness within her. It wasn't just about the objects, it was about her identity, her very being. This was her point of no return. She understood that clearly. If she allowed Arthur to go through with his plan, her carefully constructed world would be irrevocably shattered. Her secrets would remain buried, but so would her peace. She couldn't let him unilaterally destroy something so fundamental to who she was. The confrontation was unavoidable. She had to act. She had to find a way to make him see, to make him understand, that her junk was anything but. "Give me time," Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly firm, a faint tremor of defiance in her tone. "Before you call anyone, before you throw anything out, just give me a chance to go through it. Properly." Arthur paused, surprised by her uncharacteristic assertiveness. He had expected passive resistance, quiet resentment, not a direct plea. He saw the flicker of something in her eyes, a determination he hadn't witnessed in years. He suspected it was a futile gesture, a last-ditch effort to cling to her collection. But he was tired of fighting. "Fine," he conceded, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm setting a deadline. Eleanor, 2 weeks. That's all you get. 2 weeks to clear out the garage. After that, if it's not done, I'm calling the service. And we're putting the house on the market." He walked away, leaving Eleanor standing amidst her silent treasures, the weight of his ultimatum pressing down on her. 2 weeks. It felt impossibly short. How could she possibly sort through decades of careful collecting, of hidden value, in such a short time? And how could she convince Arthur, who saw only clutter, of the intrinsic worth of these objects, without revealing the full extent of her secret knowledge? Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Fear mingled with a burgeoning resolve. This wasn't just about financial solvency for Arthur. It was about Eleanor's dignity, her hidden genius, her very right to exist as she was. The quiet, gentle Eleanor Vance, the woman whom the world dismissed, was about to be pushed to the brink, forced to uncover the extraordinary truth hidden beneath the mundane surface of her life. The thread of their ordinary existence had unraveled, and Eleanor knew, with chilling certainty, that she was standing at the precipice of an irreversible change. The secrets she had kept so diligently would finally have to come to light. Arthur Vance, still buzzing with the anxiety of his job situation and the burgeoning resentment towards Eleanor's perceived impracticality, saw the 2-week deadline as a concession, a means to an end. He had no intention of letting Eleanor meticulously sort through her treasures. Time was a luxury they couldn't afford, and he was convinced her efforts would yield nothing but more dust and vague historical anecdotes. He needed a decisive, undeniable validation of his stance, a professional voice to echo his own exasperation. "I've got an idea," Arthur announced one evening, interrupting Eleanor's quiet contemplation of a rather dusty, seemingly ordinary ceramic plate. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, scrolling through his tablet, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "To make this whole decluttering process more efficient, I'm bringing in an expert, an appraiser. He'll come in, give us an honest assessment of what's truly valuable, and what's, well, just junk. That way, you'll see I'm right, and we can get rid of this stuff without any emotional fuss." Eleanor's stomach tightened. An appraiser. The very word sent a ripple of unease through her. It wasn't the assessment itself she feared. It was the inevitable public unveiling of her private passion. The scrutiny of an outsider who might not understand her unique way of seeing things. More importantly, it was the risk of revealing her secrets, her hidden knowledge, before she was ready. She knew the true value of many of her pieces, a value far beyond Arthur's wildest imaginings. But she also knew the dangers of revealing such wealth too abruptly, especially with Arthur's current financial anxiety. He might react unpredictably. "Arthur, that's not necessary," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I can manage it myself. I know what's here." "Exactly," Arthur countered, missing the nuance in her tone. "You think you know what's here, but you're too attached. This guy, Julian Thorne, he's a professional. He's worked with some of the wealthiest families in New England, even appeared on those antique reality shows. He's impartial. He'll tell us what's what. He's booked for next Tuesday." He spoke with an air of finality, clearly pleased with his proactive solution. He saw Julian as an ally, a professional validating his complaints, a hammer to shatter Eleanor's delusional attachment to her clutter. Julian Thorne arrived precisely at 10:00 a.m. the following Tuesday, a man as meticulously polished as the antique silver he often appraised. He was in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored tweed jacket, his silver hair neatly combed. His eyes, keen and discerning, held a subtle flicker of disdain as he stepped into the Vance home, which, despite Eleanor's efforts, still presented a formidable maze of accumulated objects. The faint scent of dust and aged paper filled the air, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled environments he typically frequented. "Mr. Vance, a pleasure," Julian said, his voice smooth, cultivated. He barely spared a glance at Eleanor, his initial assessment seemingly concluding she was merely the quiet, somewhat disheveled housewife. "Right. Let's get on with it. Where should we begin with this collection?" His tone, though polite, carried a subtle condescension, a dismissive implication that he expected little of true value. Arthur, beaming with self-satisfaction, led Julian to the living room, which was crammed with everything from Victorian fainting couches to a towering stack of vintage record players. "It's extensive," Arthur explained, a note of embarrassment in his voice. "My wife, she has a discerning eye for unique items." He offered a strained chuckle. Julian Thorne began his cursory appraisal, moving quickly from item to item, his gaze sweeping over each piece with practiced detachment. He picked up a chipped ceramic figurine, turning it over in his hand. Mass-produced, early 20th century, sentimental value, perhaps, monetary minimal. He placed it back down with a gentle thud. He breezed past a collection of old tin toys, a stack of faded landscape paintings, and a cumbersome, tarnished brass telescope. His initial judgments were swift, almost dismissive, confirming Arthur's unspoken conviction that this was all second-rate junk. Eleanor stood quietly by, observing his methods, a faint, almost imperceptible frown on her face. She felt a familiar sting of dismissal, but also a growing irritation at his superficiality. Then, Julian paused before a small, seemingly unremarkable ceramic vase, its surface covered in a muted, earthy glaze. He picked it up, rotating it absently. Ah, a rather crude piece. Late 19th century American pottery. Perhaps a rustic aesthetic, if one appreciates such things. He was about to set it down. Eleanor, who had been holding her breath, could no longer remain silent. It was a compulsion, an instinct that superseded her fear of exposure. "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne," she interjected softly, her voice surprising both men. "If you look closely, just beneath the rim, you'll notice a faint, almost invisible spiral motif. It's a very specific fingerprint technique used by the Native American potters of the Pueblo Bonito region, specifically during a very brief period between 1890 and 1895. The glaze, too, is distinct. It contains traces of a very rare copper oxide, unique to that region's soil composition during that time." She didn't state its value. She merely stated the historical and artistic facts, her tone calm, almost academic. Julian Thorne, who had been about to dismiss the vase, paused, his brow furrowed. He brought the vase closer to his eyes, tilting it towards the light. He had only given it a cursory glance, relying on its initial unappealing appearance. He knew of the Pueblo Bonito potters. Of course, a niche but highly valuable area of Native American art. But few truly understood the intricacies of their regional variations and specific dating markers. He traced the barely visible spiral motif with a manicured finger. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed his face. He looked at Eleanor, his initial assessment of her as a mere clutterer dissolving. He then moved on, a subtle shift in his demeanor. He was more cautious now, his movements slower, his gaze more probing. He picked up a rather unassuming mirror, its silvered surface dull, its wooden frame chipped and unremarkable. "And this old thing," he muttered, turning it over. "Standard colonial reproduction, probably from the 1950s. "Not quite," Eleanor interjected again, her voice still soft, but with an underlying current of quiet authority. She stepped closer, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible mark on the wooden frame, hidden beneath a layer of grime. "That's a very early craftsman's mark, Mr. Thorne. It's an inverted R within a carved oak leaf, characteristic of the workshop of Elias Remington, a master cabinet maker in Philadelphia, active from 1765 to 1780. His pieces were renowned for their hidden compartments and secret details. This particular mark indicates it was one of his earliest works. Before his signature became more prominent." Julian froze. Elias Remington. The name resonated in the annals of early American furniture. His pieces were exceedingly rare, often commanding astronomical prices. He fumbled for his small magnifying loupe, his hand suddenly less steady. He peered at the mark Eleanor had indicated, his eyes widening. An inverted R within a carved oak leaf. It was so faint, so expertly concealed within the decorative carving, that only a truly trained eye, or one intimately familiar with Remington's oeuvre, would ever notice it. His heart began to pound. He had almost dismissed a potential treasure. Arthur, standing awkwardly nearby, watched the exchange with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. He saw Julian's face, the sudden shift from polite indifference to stunned recognition. He didn't understand the jargon, the significance of the names and marks. But he understood the sudden gravity in Julian's demeanor. His ally was no longer simply validating his complaints. Something far more complex was unfolding. Julian Thorne straightened up, his face pale, a forced smile playing on his lips. His dismissive arrogance had vanished, replaced by a cautious respect, even a nascent fear. This woman, the unassuming Eleanor Vance, was no mere amateur. She was a savant, a walking encyclopedia of obscure art history, capable of spotting details that even he, a highly paid professional with decades of experience, had nearly missed. He realized, with a jolt, that he was in the presence of someone truly extraordinary, someone whose knowledge dwarfed his own superficial understanding. "Remarkable," Julian murmured, his voice now entirely devoid of condescension, laced instead with a newfound, almost reverent awe. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, your eye for detail is quite exceptional. You truly have a gift." He glanced quickly at Arthur, who still looked utterly bewildered. Julian knew he couldn't reveal anything substantial in front of the husband. Not yet. The potential implications of what he was seeing were too immense. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, turning to Arthur, his tone carefully modulated, "this preliminary assessment, it's been most illuminating. There are certainly a few items here that are more interesting than I initially anticipated." He paused, choosing his words with extreme care. "I'd like to propose a more thorough, in-depth appraisal. Perhaps we could schedule a second visit. I'd like to bring some of my specialized equipment. Perhaps a few colleagues who are experts in very specific, niche areas." He offered a practiced, reassuring smile. "It's standard procedure for collections of this unusual diversity. And Mrs. Vance," he added, turning to Eleanor, his eyes holding a look of deep, professional intrigue, "I would greatly appreciate it if you could be present for the next session. Your insights would be invaluable." Arthur, still processing the sudden shift in Julian's tone and the unusual request, merely nodded, trying to appear composed. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. Whatever it takes to get this sorted." He didn't quite understand the change, but he sensed a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Eleanor's junk might fetch a few $100s. He had no idea the true gold that Julian Thorne had just glimpsed. Julian, meanwhile, made a hasty retreat, his mind buzzing, already formulating plans for the second, far more significant, appraisal. He had just stumbled upon a treasure trove, and the most valuable gem in it wasn't an object, but the unassuming woman standing amidst her junk. Julian Thorne, the polished appraiser, left the Vance residence with a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. His professional facade had barely concealed the seismic shift in his perception. Eleanor Vance was no mere amateur collector. She was a living, breathing archive of art history, a hidden genius. The crude piece of pottery and the standard colonial reproduction mirror were now etched in his mind as monumental oversights he had nearly committed. His initial disdain had curdled into a mix of awe, professional intrigue, and a burgeoning, almost avaricious ambition. He returned to his sleek, modern office in downtown Boston, a stark contrast to the cluttered charm of the Vance home. The first thing he did was dive into the esoteric corners of academic databases, searching for Eleanor Dubois, the name Ilara had used in her youth. The results, though fragmented, confirmed his suspicions. A brilliant prodigy in the early 90s, groundbreaking papers, then a sudden, inexplicable disappearance from the academic world. Whispers of a scandal, a disputed attribution, a powerful professor whose reputation had crushed a younger rival. Julian, a shrewd operator, pieced together the narrative. Eleanor Vance was a phoenix, now rising from the ashes of a career unjustly destroyed. He recognized the pattern, talent suppressed, only to emerge stronger. He saw not just potential profit, but a chance to align himself with a rediscovered legend, a move that could elevate his own standing in the exclusive world of high-value appraisals. Meanwhile, back at the Old Victorian, Arthur Vance, oblivious to the seismic shifts occurring around him, saw Julian Thorne's request for a second, more thorough appraisal as a positive sign. Not a sign of immense wealth, of course, but perhaps enough to cover a few months' bills, or at least to justify Eleanor's eccentric hobby in his mind. He was still consumed by his own anxieties about his job security and the increasingly desperate need to cut expenses. "He seemed genuinely interested," Arthur remarked to Eleanor that evening, a rare note of optimism in his voice. "Maybe we can get a few thousand from all this. Enough to fix the roof, at least." He still couldn't fathom the true scale of what Julian had hinted at. His mind was too firmly rooted in their current financial struggles to consider anything beyond a modest windfall. Eleanor merely nodded, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She understood Julian's motives, the hunger in his eyes when he'd recognized her knowledge. She also understood Arthur's limited perspective. She had spent years protecting her treasures, not just from the elements, but from the casual dismissal of others. Now, the walls of her private world were crumbling, slowly, but inevitably. The impending second appraisal felt less like a simple transaction and more like a public unmasking, a gauntlet she had to run. Arthur, in his misguided attempt to help and prepare for the upcoming appraisal, decided to take matters into his own hands. While Eleanor was out one afternoon, volunteering at the local animal shelter, a new routine she'd picked up after rescuing the stray cat, Arthur began his own version of decluttering. He marched into the garage, armed with trash bags and a resolute frown. "She won't even notice," he muttered to himself, eyeing a stack of what he considered particularly unsightly junk. He tossed a chipped porcelain doll he vaguely remembered Eleanor mentioning into a donate box. He didn't know it was a rare 18th century German bisque doll, its chipped surface a testament to its age rather than its lack of value. He then dragged out a heavy, tarnished brass birdcage, its bars bent, and placed it on the curb for trash pickup. He had no idea it was a historically significant piece from a specific 19th century American bird market, coveted by collectors. His actions, born of exasperation, were a silent, unknowing betrayal of Eleanor's trust and her profound understanding of hidden value. He was literally throwing away parts of her untold fortune, meticulously categorized in her mind. The arena for Eleanor's ultimate test was their own home, the very place where her passion had been mocked, where her intelligence had been systematically undervalued by the man she loved. Every cluttered room, every dusty shelf, was imbued with the weight of Arthur's unspoken judgments and the town's quiet ridicule. It was here, amidst her beloved junk, that she would either be vindicated or utterly exposed as the eccentric Arthur believed her to be. The day of the second appraisal dawned with a crisp, autumnal chill. Arthur, having secured an unexpected last-minute interview for a potential new job in a different town, a small, insignificant opportunity that ironically served as a convenient excuse to be absent, left early, leaving Eleanor to face Julian and his team alone. "Don't sell anything too cheap," he'd called over his shoulder, still envisioning a few $100s. He had no idea of the true stakes. Eleanor stood in the living room, a solitary figure amidst the organized chaos. Julian Thorne arrived punctually, accompanied by a small entourage, a bespectacled junior appraiser, a meticulous photographer with specialized lighting equipment, and a discreet, note-taking assistant. The air was thick with a palpable tension, a sense of anticipation that Eleanor recognized from her academic past. The quiet hum before a major discovery. Julian, his demeanor now one of studied respect, began the deep dive. He moved slowly, deliberately, his magnifying loupe perpetually poised. He wasn't just looking for value now. He was searching for confirmation of Eleanor's insights, for the hidden narrative beneath the layers of time and neglect. "Mrs. Vance," Julian began, his voice softer, more solicitous than before. "Could you perhaps tell me more about this unusual clock?" He gestured to a large, ornate grandfather clock in the corner, its wooden casing warped, its face cracked, its hands stubbornly stuck at midnight. Arthur had often complained about its constant presence, taking up valuable space. Eleanor approached the clock, her eyes, once again, coming alive with that singular, focused intensity. "It's not just an unusual clock, Mr. Thorne," she corrected him gently. "It's a specific variant of a Simon Willard tall case clock, circa 1790s. Note the specific carving on the finials, the precise curvature of the arch, and the mechanism." She carefully opened the glass door, revealing the dusty, seized gears. "The escapement is a unique design, a patented modification by Willard himself, meant to dampen the pendulum's swing. It's almost never seen outside of museum pieces, and even then, only in his earliest work." She pointed to a faint etched signature on a hidden brass plate deep within the mechanism, barely visible without a specialized light. And here, his earliest W mark. This clock was likely a prototype, never intended for widespread production. The junior appraiser gasped, moving closer, his own loop pressed against the glass. Simon Willard, the most famous clockmaker of early America. His prototypes were legendary, often fetching astronomical sums. Julian, observing Eleanor's calm, almost matter-of-fact explanation, felt a tremor of excitement, tempered by a growing unease. She knew exactly what she had. The pressure mounted. Julian was now meticulously documenting every item Eleanor pointed out, every subtle detail she revealed. A seemingly ordinary wooden chest, its paint peeling, was revealed to be a rare example of Pennsylvania Dutch dower chest, its faded hex signs imbued with cultural and historical significance. A stack of yellowed sheet music, dismissed as sentimental clutter by Arthur, contained rare unpublished compositions by a forgotten 19th-century American composer. Eleanor moved through the rooms with an almost clairvoyant understanding, occasionally pausing before an item Arthur had deemed worthless, her gaze lingering, as if listening to its silent story. She pointed out a hidden compartment in a dilapidated desk, revealing a collection of Civil War-era letters, perfectly preserved. She identified a faint watermark on a seemingly blank piece of parchment, revealing it to be a rare colonial land deed signed by a pivotal historical figure. The hours ticked by, each discovery compounding Julian's awe. He had already made a few discreet, coded calls to his contacts at major auction houses, hinting at significant new acquisitions and unprecedented finds. The atmosphere in the house, once filled with Arthur's complaints, was now electric with the silent hum of untold wealth being meticulously unearthed. The ticking clock of Arthur's 2-week deadline, the threat of the decluttering service, now loomed large in Eleanor's mind. She knew she had to convince Julian of the true urgency, to prevent Arthur from unwittingly destroying more valuable pieces. She knew the weight of his ambition, his desire for a sensational discovery. She had to harness that. "Mr. Thorne," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, drawing him aside into a room filled with her most beloved, yet seemingly mundane, pieces. "I have something else, something I believe is unique." She led him to a dusty, forgotten corner of the attic, away from his team, where a tarnished, unremarkable bronze statue, no larger than a child's hand, sat atop a pile of old newspapers, seemingly used as a mere paperweight. Its surface was dull, covered in a thick layer of grime and corrosion. Julian looked at it, his expression skeptical. It looked like a generic decorative piece, perhaps from a flea market. Nothing remarkable. "And this, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, trying to mask his disappointment. He had been hoping for something grand, something immediately obvious. "This," Eleanor began, her eyes distant, her voice almost hypnotic, "is not what it seems. It's a sculpture of the Greek goddess Artemis, but it's not a classical piece. Look at the fluidity of the drapery, the subtle, almost melancholic expression on her face. And the stance, the way her weight shifts, it's a departure from the typical Roman copies." She paused, then pointed to a barely visible, almost abstract symbol etched into the base, obscured by centuries of patina. "That mark, it's the signature of Lysippus, not the famous Greek sculptor, but his lesser-known apprentice, a woman whose works were often mistaken for his own, or simply attributed to School of Lysippus. She was almost erased from history, her genius overshadowed." Julian's breath hitched. Lysippus. Even an apprentice's work from that period, if authentically attributed, would be priceless. But a female apprentice, whose work had been historically misattributed or suppressed, that would be revolutionary. He pulled out his high-powered jeweler's loupe, his hands shaking slightly. He peered at the symbol, then at the statue's subtle contours. The patina was incredibly old, authentic. His mind raced. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a rediscovery. a vindication of a forgotten artist. And Eleanor, the unassuming bird lady who rescued stray cats, had not only found it but understood its profound historical significance. He spent what felt like an eternity examining the statue, his face a mask of intense concentration. The air in the attic was thick with unspoken tension. Eleanor watched him, her quiet gaze revealing nothing but a profound understanding. She knew what he would find. She had always known. The bronze statue, covered in centuries of neglect, was not just a paperweight. It was the keystone to her hidden legacy, the ultimate challenge to Arthur's dismissive worldview, and the silent, undeniable proof of her secret brilliance. The final act of the test was about to begin. The silence in the attic was profound, broken only by the rapid, almost frantic clicks of Julian Thorne's camera as his assistant meticulously documented the grime-covered bronze statue. Dust motes danced in the solitary beam of a powerful LED flashlight, illuminating the rich patina that obscured what Julian now, with a trembling certainty, believed to be a masterpiece. Eleanor stood nearby, her expression serene, observing Julian's growing agitation with a quiet understanding. She had known this moment would come, this unveiling of a truth long hidden. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. His reputation, built on decades of sober, precise appraisals, felt suddenly inadequate in the face of this potential discovery. He was no longer just an appraiser. He was an archaeologist of art, digging through layers of neglect and misunderstanding. His fingers, usually so steady, trembled as he gently, almost reverently, began to wipe away centuries of grime from the statue's base with a soft, lint-free cloth. "Mrs. Vance," he murmured, his voice strained. "Are you absolutely certain about this mark? Lysippus's apprentice? A female apprentice?" The notion was revolutionary, a whisper of a lost narrative in the grand history of art. Eleanor nodded. Her name was Lyra. She worked in his shadow, her pieces often indistinguishable from his. But her touch was finer, more nuanced in certain details. The way the light plays on the fabric of Artemis's chiton, the delicate curve of her lips. It's Lyra's signature, not Lysippus's own more robust, heroic style. Her voice was soft, but imbued with an authority that Julian could not deny. She wasn't guessing. She was stating a known fact, a secret held only by those who had truly delved into the forgotten corners of art history. He continued cleaning, his movements deliberate, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, painstakingly, the obscure symbol on the base began to emerge with greater clarity. A stylized bird, wings outstretched, intertwined with a lyre. A hidden signature, indeed. And as more of the grime was removed, the bronze beneath revealed a subtle, almost ethereal glow, hinting at the exquisite craftsmanship beneath. The details Eleanor had mentioned, the unique fluidity of the drapery, the melancholic tilt of Artemis's head became strikingly apparent, separating it from any mere classical reproduction. "This is extraordinary," Julian breathed, his voice barely audible. He looked up at Eleanor, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. "If this is what I think it is, Mrs. Vance, this piece alone could redefine a segment of ancient art history. And its value, it would be in the millions. Several millions." Eleanor simply offered a faint, knowing smile. She had spent years, decades even, nurturing these pieces, seeing their true worth when the world saw only discarded junk. This small bronze statue, used as a paperweight by Arthur, was the culmination of her life's quiet work, a testament to her unyielding belief in the value of the overlooked. Julian, still reeling, quickly moved through the rest of the items Eleanor indicated, his skepticism completely vanquished. He found an exquisitely crafted miniature portrait, hidden within a seemingly ordinary locket, painted by an obscure yet highly influential female artist from the American colonial period. Its value estimated to be in the high six figures. He unearthed a set of seemingly mundane silver utensils that, upon closer inspection, bore the distinctive hallmarks of Paul Revere's lesser-known silversmith apprentices, each spoon alone worth a small fortune. Each discovery was a crescendo, a new wave of revelation that swept through the dusty rooms. The assistant meticulously documented. The photographer snapped endless shots, their faces shifting from professional detachment to wide-eyed astonishment. The air in the house crackled with the silent hum of astronomical figures. Julian, usually a composed and reserved professional, found himself occasionally running a hand through his hair, muttering exclamations under his breath. A first edition of Moby Dick, inscribed by Melville himself. Julian whispered, his voice hoarse with excitement, as Eleanor calmly pointed to a seemingly innocuous, leather-bound volume tucked away on a cluttered bookshelf. Hidden behind a stack of old encyclopedias, the inscription. It's a personal dedication to his first publisher. This is unprecedented. Its value would also be in the millions. The total value of Eleanor's junk collection was not just significant, it was staggering. Julian's mental calculations soared past hundreds of thousands, then millions, and rapidly into the tens of millions. Eleanor Vance, the eccentric, clutter-prone housewife, was, in fact, a secret millionaire, her fortune hidden in plain sight, protected by the very disregard of those around her. Just as Julian was meticulously examining a rare, 17th-century Japanese woodblock print, carefully folded and tucked inside an old, empty picture frame, the front door creaked open. Arthur Vance, looking harried but mildly optimistic from his job interview, stepped inside. He was expecting Eleanor to be finishing up with the appraiser, perhaps presenting him with a check for a few $100s. Well, that was a bust, Arthur grumbled, shrugging off his coat. The job interview was a dead end. So, did you manage to clear out any of this mess? Did old Mr. Thorne find anything that can actually help us pay for that new roof? He gestured dismissively at a stack of antique hatpins. Anything at all? Julian Thorne slowly straightened up, turning from the woodblock print, his face pale, almost ghostly. He looked at Arthur, then at Eleanor, then back at Arthur, a profound, unreadable expression on his face. He held the delicate woodblock print, a masterpiece of artistry, as if it were spun from light. Mr. Vance, Julian began, his voice strangely subdued, a stark contrast to his earlier professional polish. He cleared his throat, gathering his thoughts. I believe your wife has been rather understated about the nature of her collection. He paused, taking a deep breath. To put it plainly, Mr. Vance, what your wife possesses here is not just a collection. It is, in fact, an unparalleled treasury of historical and artistic masterpieces. These aren't merely things she's gathered. They are pieces of history, rare artifacts, and works of forgotten genius. He then held up the bronze statue of Artemis, its newly revealed luster gleaming under the attic light. This piece alone, Mr. Vance, a bronze by Lyra, the apprentice of Lysippus, is projected to fetch upwards of $5 to $10 million at auction. And this, he gestured to the woodblock print, this 17th century Hishikawa Morinobu is likely worth another $2 to $3 million. Your wife, Mr. Vance, is not just a collector. She is, in every sense of the word, a secret millionaire. Her collection, by a conservative estimate, is worth well over $50 million. The words hung in the air, echoing in the stunned silence of the cluttered living room. $50 million. The number seemed to vibrate with an impossible reality. Arthur's face, which had been contorted by irritation and financial worry, drained of all color. His jaw dropped, his eyes wide and disbelieving. He looked at the junk that surrounded him, the objects he had scorned, the very clutter he had demanded be thrown out. He looked at the chipped pottery, the tarnished silver, the dusty books. Then, slowly, his gaze turned to Eleanor. She stood quietly, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her expression unreadable. She hadn't gloated, hadn't reveled in his shock. There was only a profound calm about her, the quiet dignity of someone whose truth had finally been revealed. Arthur's mind reeled. The mortgage, the roof, his job, all his anxieties, all his complaints, all his accusations of her being impractical and wasteful, shattered into a million pieces. The woman he had dismissed as a messy hoarder, a financial burden, was, in fact, a person of immense wealth and, more profoundly, of immense hidden knowledge. The truth of her secret fortune, casually dropped into their living room, hit him like a physical blow, leaving him breathless. His world irrevocably turned upside down. The weight of unseen treasures was now suddenly, shockingly, apparent. The silence that followed Julian Thorne's revelation was not an empty one. It vibrated with the shattering of Arthur Vance's preconceived notions, echoing with the clamor of a world turned upside down. Arthur stood frozen, his eyes, wide and disbelieving, darting from Julian's solemn face to Eleanor's serene one, then back to the mundane objects he had so recently scorned. $50 million. The number ricocheted in his mind, absurd and impossible, yet uttered by a man whose reputation was built on precise, unimpeachable valuations. 50 million. Arthur finally stammered, the words barely a rasp. Eleanor, what is he talking about? Is this some kind of joke? His voice was laced with a chaotic mixture of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of betrayal. He looked at Eleanor, his wife, the woman he thought he knew completely, and saw a stranger. Why? Why would you keep something like this a secret? All these years, all our financial struggles, the arguments. Why? Eleanor. His voice rose, tinged with a raw, unexpected pain. Eleanor met his gaze, her usual gentle demeanor now tinged with a quiet, almost melancholic resolve. The time for secrets was over. The floodgates, long held shut, were finally forced open. It wasn't a secret I kept to hurt you. Arthur, she began, her voice soft but steady, resonating with a truth that had been buried for decades. She gestured around the cluttered room, her hand sweeping over the very objects that had caused so much contention. Each of these pieces, they're more than just their monetary value. They represent stories, forgotten legacies, and my connection to them runs deeper than you ever knew. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Before I met you, before Eagle Creek, I was Eleanor Dubois. I was an art history scholar, a prodigy. They called me. She saw Julian Thorne nod subtly in recognition, confirming her words. My focus was on overlooked artists, marginalized voices, the silent legacies of art that history often dismisses. My doctoral thesis was on the very subject of misattributed or lost works by female apprentices of renowned masters. It was groundbreaking. Arthur listened, stunned, a slow dawning of understanding creeping into his shock. This was the past she had always guarded so fiercely, the mystery he had never dared to probe too deeply. I discovered something significant, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, infused with the passion she had long suppressed. A collection of sketches, attributed to a lesser-known Italian Renaissance artist, but which I, through meticulous research, proved were actually the early, unsigned works of his exceptionally talented female apprentice. Her name was Isabella. Her genius had been deliberately overshadowed by her male mentor, her contributions erased from the historical record. Her eyes hardened slightly, a flash of a deeply etched wound. My research, my findings, were presented to my senior advisor, Professor Alistair Finch. Eleanor paused, the name a bitter taste on her tongue. Finch. He was the villain in her story, though Arthur knew nothing of him. Finch was a titan in the field, but also a man consumed by ego and professional jealousy. He saw my discovery not as a breakthrough, but as a threat to his established narratives. Perhaps even a chance to claim the credit himself. Julian Thorne, listening intently, shifted his weight. He knew of Professor Finch, a formidable, ruthless academic whose reputation for intellectual appropriation was legendary in certain circles. He had dismissed the rumors as petty academic squabbles until now. He tried to discredit me, Eleanor explained, her voice tinged with the pain of old wounds. He publicly ridiculed my findings, spread rumors about my unprofessional methods, my overactive imagination. He manipulated the academic committee, claiming my research was unsubstantiated speculation. He essentially stole my work, presenting a watered-down version of it as his own, while ensuring I was effectively blacklisted from every major institution. My career, my future, everything I had worked for, was destroyed. Overnight. Arthur stared at her, his face a mixture of horror and profound guilt. He had never known. He had dismissed her as merely disorganized, never once considering the depth of her past suffering, the brilliance that had been so cruelly extinguished. I retreated, Eleanor confessed, her gaze distant, to collect not just objects, but fragments of forgotten beauty, pieces whose true worth was overlooked by a world that judged superficially. It was my quiet rebellion, my way of proving that true value often lies beneath the surface, unseen, unacknowledged. I saw these pieces, she gestured again, as kindred spirits, undervalued, dismissed, just like me. Just then, as if summoned by the very mention of past malice, a new voice echoed from the doorway. How touching, Eleanor. Still playing the wronged genius. I see. Professor Alistair Finch stood there, a tall, gaunt man with an air of academic arrogance. He had heard whispers of Julian Thorne's unprecedented finds at the Vance residence and, driven by a gnawing curiosity and a possessive sense of intellectual property over anything related to Eleanor's work, had tracked Julian to the house. His presence sent a chill through the room, a tangible embodiment of Eleanor's past trauma. Finch, Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion, yet radiating a quiet steel. I heard you've finally decided to monetize your eccentricities. Finch sneered, his eyes darting hungrily over the various treasures. He had seen the news reports about the initial findings. Though I doubt anything you possess could truly rival the depth of my scholarly pursuits. He glanced at Julian Thorne, his smile oily. I trust you're being careful, Mr. Thorne. Miss Dubois here had a rather tendency to exaggerate. Her discoveries were often more fiction than fact. Julian Thorne, who had initially been an unwitting antagonist to Eleanor's talent, now stood firm, utterly transformed into her advocate. He stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Finch and Eleanor. Professor Finch, Julian said, his voice crisp, professional, and utterly unwavering. I assure you, Mrs. Vance's attributions are beyond reproach. In fact, her insights have proven to be not only accurate but revolutionary. This bronze by Lyra, for instance, a piece you once dismissed as mere workshop clutter when I showed you photographs years ago. Julian paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. He had, years ago, tried to get Finch's opinion on a preliminary photo of the statue, only to be brusquely dismissed. Finch's face blanched. He remembered the statue, a blurry image from a photo Julian had sent, a piece he had scoffed at as insignificant. He hadn't bothered to give it a second thought. Now, it was a multi-million-dollar masterpiece, authenticated by the very woman he had crushed. And her research into the Isabella sketches. Professor, Julian continued, pressing his advantage, which, if I recall correctly, you published a version of under your own name with certain modifications. Julian's tone was icy. I've been reviewing her original unpublished notes, meticulously detailed, cross-referenced with sources far beyond what your published work suggests. The original attributions, the profound insights, they were all Eleanor's. Arthur watched, stunned, as the scene unfolded. His wife, whom he had seen as a meek, easily dismissed figure, was standing her ground against a formidable opponent, supported by a renowned expert. Finch, cornered, lashed out. This is preposterous slander. She's always been delusional, twisting facts to suit her. Fanciful narratives. This entire collection is probably a fraud, concocted to gain attention. He eyed the Lysippus statue with a covetous gleam, a desperate desire to dismiss its value, perhaps even claim it for himself if he could undermine Eleanor's credibility. "No, Professor," Eleanor said, stepping forward, her voice surprisingly strong, cutting through Finch's bluster. "The fraud, Professor, was yours. You stole my work. You destroyed my career, but you could not destroy my truth. And unlike you, I find value in the things others dismiss. This collection," she swept her hand across the room, "is the culmination of a life lived authentically, a testament to overlooked genius, something you, in your arrogance, could never understand." Her words, delivered with quiet power, silenced Finch. He stood there, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, exposed not just as an intellectual thief, but as a small, bitter man consumed by envy. The appraiser's assistant and photographer, who had been silently observing, exchanged horrified glances. The narrative was clear. Not only was Eleanor a genius, but she was a victim of a powerful academic's malice. Julian Thorne stepped in definitively. "Given these revelations, Professor, and the undeniable authenticity of Mrs. Vance's collection, any attempt to discredit her or these pieces would be met with severe legal repercussions. This is now a matter of public record, and Mrs. Vance has overwhelming proof." Finch, defeated, finally retreated, muttering threats under his breath. He knew he was beaten. His reputation, once unassailable, was now stained. The world that had once applauded him would now see him for what he truly was. Arthur, having witnessed the entire exchange, was utterly devastated by the depth of his misunderstanding. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe, regret, and a profound, aching love. He had been so blind, so caught up in his own anxieties and superficial judgments, that he had failed to see the extraordinary woman beside him. He had belittled her passion, doubted her intellect, and unknowingly contributed to the very pain she had carried for so long. The misguided husband had finally seen the truth, and the weight of his own folly settled heavily upon him. He knew he had a long road ahead to earn back her trust, to truly understand the woman he had married. The dust motes, once dancing innocently in the sunlight filtering through the Victorian home's windows, now seemed to shimmer with the afterglow of revelation. Professor Alistair Finch, the architect of Eleanor's past pain, had retreated in disgrace, his academic reputation irrevocably tarnished. Julian Thorne, once a skeptical appraiser, now stood as Eleanor's steadfast ally, his face radiating admiration and quiet awe. But the most profound shift occurred within the very heart of the Vance household, in the strained, silent chasm between Eleanor and Arthur. Arthur, his face still pale with the shock of Julian's pronouncement and Eleanor's devastating story, felt the full, crushing weight of his ignorance and casual cruelty. The silence in the living room was punctuated only by the soft clicks of Julian's camera and the hushed murmurs of his assistants as they continued their meticulous work. Arthur's entire perception of his wife, of their life, had imploded. The mess he had so vehemently complained about was a testament not to disorganization, but to a profound, misunderstood brilliance. His complaints, his financial anxieties, his dismissal of her passion, all felt incredibly petty, almost monstrous, in the face of her untold suffering and triumphant, hidden genius. He watched Eleanor, who now moved with a quiet dignity he hadn't fully appreciated before. She was no longer just his wife. She was a woman of immense strength, resilience, and profound depth. He saw the scars of her past, the unjust blow that had driven her into this self-imposed anonymity, and understood, with a painful clarity, why she had sought solace and validation in the silent stories of forgotten objects. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. He had failed her, utterly and completely, by not seeing, by not trusting, by not knowing her. As Julian and his team finally packed up, promising detailed reports and discreet consultations with major auction houses, Arthur found himself standing alone with Eleanor in the suddenly emptier, yet still cluttered, living room. The afternoon light softened the edges of the chaos, turning what he had once seen as junk into muted works of art. "Eleanor," Arthur began, his voice hoarse, thick with emotion. He reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently taking hers. Her hand, usually soft, felt surprisingly strong. I don't even know where to begin. I am so sorry. For everything. For not seeing you. For dismissing your passion. For all the anger and the blind stupidity." His voice cracked, guilt twisting his features. "I was so focused on our financial problems, on my own anxieties, that I became completely blind to what was truly important. To you." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "It's all right, Arthur. I understand. You were worried. You didn't know. But I should have known," he insisted, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I should have listened. I should have trusted you. Instead, I belittled you, called your treasures junk, threatened to throw them out. I almost destroyed priceless pieces of history because of my own narrow-mindedness. And your past, the pain you carried, and I never knew." He looked around the room, a profound respect now in his gaze. "You've been living with a secret empire, a quiet testament to your brilliance, and I just saw it as a burden." Eleanor's smile was small, a bittersweet curve of her lips. "It was never a burden to me, Arthur. It was my solace, my way of reclaiming what was taken. Every piece I acquired, every forgotten artist I recognized, was a small victory against being dismissed, against being erased." She paused, then looked directly into his eyes. "But living with the secret, that was the burden. The distance it created between us." Arthur nodded, understanding finally blossoming between them. "I want to fix this. Eleanor, us, our future, whatever you want. If you want to keep every single piece, if you want to turn this house into a private museum, we will. Just tell me what you need." This was Arthur's moment of profound realization and atonement, his heartfelt desire to make amends. His regret was palpable, his desire to atone genuine. Over the next few months, their lives and their home were transformed, not by a complete overhaul, but by a thoughtful re-evaluation. Julian Thorne, now working closely with Eleanor, managed the discreet sale of a few selected extremely high-value pieces through private auctions and trusted collectors. It was enough to eliminate their financial anxieties entirely, pay off the mortgage, establish a substantial investment fund, and provide for future renovations. Arthur no longer worried about layoffs. Their wealth was now secured. Ironically, by the very junk he had scorned. Eleanor, however, chose to retain the vast majority of her collection, especially the pieces with significant historical and personal meaning. The house was renovated, but not to erase its character. Instead, it was meticulously organized, each room becoming a curated display. What was once clutter transformed into a cohesive, breathtaking private museum. Ancient maps adorned newly painted walls. Antique tools were displayed in custom-built cases, and the Lysippus bronze, now professionally cleaned and carefully conserved, stood proudly in a climate-controlled display case in the sun-drenched conservatory, a silent testament to a forgotten female genius. Eleanor's reputation soared beyond the local headlines. She became a sought-after consultant for museums, art galleries, and historical societies across the nation. She participated in discussions about decolonizing art history, about reevaluating overlooked artists, and about the ethical responsibilities of collectors. Her unique eye and profound knowledge were finally recognized, granting her not just material wealth, but the academic and cultural validation she had been denied. She often lectured, her gentle voice captivating audiences as she spoke of the invisible narratives embedded in everyday objects. One quiet evening, months after the initial shock had settled into a comfortable rhythm, Eleanor and Arthur sat in their newly organized, yet still wonderfully eclectic, living room. The scent of beeswax polish and old paper mingled pleasantly in the air. Arthur, now working part-time as an independent software consultant, had more flexibility, more time for Eleanor, and more engagement with her passion. He listened intently as she described the provenance of a rare 18th century porcelain tea set. "It's funny, isn't it?" Arthur mused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "All those years, I thought I was the practical one, the one with his feet on the ground. And here you were, quietly building an empire from what I called trash." He chuckled, a genuine, self-deprecating sound. "I was so worried about us losing everything, and you had already found everything." Eleanor smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "We all have different ways of seeing, Arthur. For a long time, I let others define my worth, my perspective. I let my past define my present. But this forced me to stand firm, to show the world what I knew, what I believed in." Her gaze swept over the transformed room, and it allowed me to finally be fully seen, by myself, and by you. Arthur squeezed her hand. "You taught me to see, Eleanor, not just the value in objects, but the value in hidden stories, in quiet passion, in patience, and in you." He paused, a new resolve in his eyes. "I promise, I will never take you, or your world, for granted again." The path to true understanding had been long and difficult, paved with misjudgment and silent resentment. But they had walked it, and emerged on the other side, their bond reforged, strengthened by revelation and genuine atonement. Their new calm was not just about financial security, but about a deeper, richer harmony in their shared lives. 3 years later, the old Victorian house on Elmwood Lane no longer sagged under the weight of junk. Instead, it breathed, a vibrant, living testament to reclaimed beauty and rediscovered purpose. The dusty chaos had yielded to a meticulously curated elegance, transforming the home not into a cold museum, but into a warm, inviting gallery of Eleanor's life's work. Sunlight now streamed through cleaned windows, illuminating the rich textures of antique textiles and the subtle gleam of polished wood and bronze. Each object, once dismissed, now held its rightful place, a silent storyteller in Eleanor's narrative. Arthur Vance, too, was a changed man. The relentless pressure of his former software engineering career had given way to a more balanced existence. He had found a new role as a technical consultant for nonprofit cultural institutions, a job that utilized his analytical mind without the cutthroat corporate stress. The shift allowed him to pursue a deeper involvement in Eleanor's world. He no longer saw her collection as a burden, but as an endless source of fascination, and, more importantly, a symbol of her extraordinary intellect. He learned to appreciate the subtle brushstrokes on a hidden painting, the intricate joinery of an antique cabinet, the historical weight of a faded document. His initial blindness had been replaced by a profound, almost reverent appreciation. Their relationship, once strained by unspoken resentments and stark misunderstandings, had blossomed into a partnership built on mutual respect, deep admiration, and a shared passion for the stories embedded in history. Eleanor, now widely recognized as Dr. Eleanor Vance, was no longer confined to the quiet, solitary pursuit of her passion. Her name, once synonymous with a brief, misunderstood academic controversy, was now celebrated. She was a respected voice in the art world, known for her groundbreaking work on forgotten artists and overlooked historical periods. She served as a consultant for prestigious museums, lending her keen eye to the authentication and restoration of previously misidentified pieces. Her insights were sought after, her lectures eagerly attended by scholars and enthusiasts alike. But it was her enduring desire to pay it forward that brought Eleanor her greatest joy. She established the Silent Legacies Foundation, funded by a portion of her rediscovered wealth. The foundation was dedicated to two core missions, providing scholarships and mentorship for young, talented art historians, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, and funding the conservation and exhibition of historically significant objects that might otherwise be lost to obscurity. She often led workshops, her gentle demeanor drawing in students from all walks of life, inspiring them to look beyond the obvious, to find beauty and meaning in the discarded and the forgotten. She taught them that every object, no matter how humble, had a story to tell, and that recognizing its value was an act of profound respect. One crisp autumn morning, 3 years after the great unveiling, Eleanor and Arthur walked hand in hand through the bustling aisles of a local flea market, the very kind of place where Eleanor had spent countless hours in her solitary past. The air was filled with the scent of popcorn, old books, and the murmur of haggling voices. Arthur, once impatient and judgmental in such environments, now moved with a relaxed curiosity, occasionally pointing out an interesting piece for Eleanor's inspection. They paused before a cluttered stall piled high with antique silverware. Arthur watched as Eleanor, with a practiced ease, picked up a tarnished, oddly shaped spoon, its surface blackened with age. She held it up to the light, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her finger traced a faint, almost invisible mark on the handle. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. Arthur, without a word, simply smiled back. He no longer needed to ask. He understood. The hunt for unseen treasures, the symphony of lives waiting to be discovered, would never truly end for Eleanor Vance. Her journey had come full circle, from isolation to recognition, from being misunderstood to being deeply cherished, her life now a vibrant, ongoing masterpiece of reclaimed worth. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that true value often lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for an empathetic eye to discover it, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.